Dol Guldur, the dungeons of the Necromancer, and Sauron's fortress in the north, a dark, corrupted place. Though many know of its existence, its history and purpose are somewhat vague, and so, in today's episode, we'll be exploring the dungeons of Dol Guldur. So Dol Guldur was built around the year 1050 of the Third Age, when the Necromancer first arrived in Mirkwood. This was none other than Sauron, and he erected the fortress of Dol Guldur upon the hill known as Amon Lanc. This hill had once been the capital of the Sylvan Elves in Mirkwood, led by Orofer, Thranduil's father, though he later led his people north and abandoned their dwelling, as he was disturbed by the rumors concerning Sauron's rise in power. After claiming the hill and building his stronghold, Sauron's power grew, and we're told that Easterlings started to live in and near southern Mirkwood, possibly being summoned by Sauron or drawn to his presence. Sauron also started to fill Mirkwood with giant spiders and orcs, as his corruption spread throughout the forest, twisting it. It seems that his presence there was felt by the hobbits, who back then lived close to Mirkwood, and that this feeling of unease caused them to leave their homes and travel westward. Sauron's new fortress of Dol Guldur and the spreading corruption in Mirkwood would not go unnoticed. For around the year 1100, the wise, whose numbers included wizards and elven leaders, discovered the stronghold's existence, though they thought that the Necromancer was a Nazgul. Despite their suspicions, the wise chose to do nothing, and it would take almost 1,000 years before it was investigated again. For in the year 2063, they started to suspect that the Necromancer was possibly Sauron taking shape again, and so Gandalf set off to infiltrate Dol Guldur, hoping to discover and confirm the identity of the Necromancer and his purpose. However, Sauron learnt of Gandalf's entry, and he chose to flee before his identity could be discovered. This was the start of the Watchful Peace, which would last until the year 2460. For in that year, Sauron returned to Dol Guldur, his strength increased. He directed his servants to attack Gondor, and sent out orcs to the Misty Mountains to repopulate them and bring them under his influence. For the next 400 years, his strength kept growing, and his spies and servants spread throughout the land surrounding Mirkwood. In the year 2841, Thrain, Thorin's father, decided to return to Erebor, and he set out with a company of dwarfs that included Balin and Dwalin. Sauron's forces started to pursue them, and their journey grew more difficult as they traveled north. 4 years later, a black rain was said to have driven them towards Mirkwood, where they took shelter under the eaves and darkness of the forest. And that very night, tragedy befell the company, for Thrain was kidnapped and taken to Dol Guldur. I think it's quite likely that the rain was conjured by Sauron to bring Thrain closer to his land and stronghold. Here, Thrain was tortured, and his dwarven ring of power, the last of the 7, was taken from him. The torture he endured drove him mad, and he was thrown into the dungeons and pits of Dol Guldur to rave alone for 5 years. In the year 2850, Gandalf entered Dol Guldur in disguise, and he came across a dwarf that was close to death in its dungeons. This was Thrain, though Gandalf would not learn his identity until many years later, for all Thrain could focus on was the loss of his dwarven ring of power. And before he died, he gave Gandalf a map and a key, those of Erebor, and asked for them to be given to his son. Gandalf's mission into Dol Guldur would prove to be invaluable, for this time he was successful, and he learned that the Necromancer was indeed Sauron, and that he had started to gather all the rings of power, as he sought for news regarding the One Ring. 1 year later, during a meeting of the White Council, Gandalf urged them to attack Dol Guldur. However, Saruman overruled him, and convinced the council to merely stand watch and remain inactive. In the year 2941, after Thorin and company set out on their quest to reclaim Erebor, the White Council met once again, and Saruman finally conceded and agreed to launch an attack on Dol Guldur. It's possible that they were aided by the elves of Lorien, and their plan was successful, as Sauron was driven out of his stronghold in the north and fled towards Mordor. According to Gandalf, Saruman played a key role in driving out Sauron, for he says, "It was by the devices of Saruman that we drove him from Dol Guldur. I wonder what sort of devices were used, whether it was some strategy or machines of war. Their victory allowed the forest of Mirkwood to grow more wholesome, and it helped to protect the northern lands of Middle-earth. Yet it was not complete, for the stronghold of Dol Guldur was not destroyed, and Sauron had survived. 10 years later, in the year 2951, Sauron sent out 3 of the Nazgul to reoccupy Dol Guldur. Their leader was Khamul of the East, who was second in command to the Witch King. During the events of the War of the Ring, 3 attacks were launched from Dol Guldur, as its forces attacked Lothlorien, though each time they were repelled. Some orcs had also been sent out to attack Thranduil's realm, though these too were defeated. After the final assault, Galadriel and Celeborn led a counterattack, and they managed to conquer Dol Guldur once again. Galadriel then brought down its walls, and the fortress was completely destroyed. Celeborn then claimed part of southern Mirkwood as his new kingdom, called East Lorien, and this included the hill of Amon Lanc. Now I'd like to discuss Dol Guldur's structure and other characteristics. So the hill it was built upon was said to be the highest point in southern Mirkwood, and that no trees grew on its summit. This is why it was called Amon Lanc, which means naked hill. The stronghold of Dol Guldur was described as being smaller and less protected than the fortress of Barad-dûr. When Frodo looked at the lands of Lorien, he describes them as being full of light, and yet across the river he could see a dark land, flat and empty, formless and vague, and that dark fortifications rose there. We're told the sun that lay on Lothlorien had no power to enlighten the shadow of that distant height. During the events of the War of the Ring, Haldir says that a black cloud was present over Dol Guldur, which could have been part of Sauron's preparation as he readied his forces and machines of war for his assault on Lothlorien. It is also said that Dol Guldur was filled with dungeons and pits. I imagine it to be similar to Barad-dûr, but on a much smaller scale. It would also stand to reason that it was filled with Sauron's forces such as orcs and Easterlings, and these forces would allow him to exert his influence in the northern regions of Middle-earth, and perhaps even stop the northern factions such as the Elves of Lothlorien from coming to Gondor's or Rohan's aid. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video and I hope you enjoyed it. If you can, leave a like, cause it helps this channel immensely, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we can once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.